The crack of Delilah Norton's voice cut through the saloon like a whip at high noon, silencing every man in the room as she stood with her fists planted on her hips and fire blazing in her green eyes. I said no, and if you cannot understand plain English, perhaps I should fetch a dictionary and point to the relevant words with my boot. The year was 1878, and women in Willits, California did not speak to men this way, especially not to the foreman of the largest timber operation in Mendocino County. But Delilah had never been particularly concerned with what women were supposed to do. The foreman, a barrel-chested man named Tucker with breath that could strip paint, stepped back as though she had physically struck him. His face turned the color of sun-dried bricks, and the dozen loggers scattered throughout the small saloon froze with their whiskey glasses halfway to their lips. The piano player's fingers stumbled over the keys before falling silent entirely. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Tucker sputtered, his meaty hands curling into fists at his sides. "You are just a serving girl. Your job is to bring drinks and look pleasant, not run your mouth like some high and mighty lady from San Francisco." Delilah picked up the tray of empty glasses from the nearest table with deliberate calm, her movements precise, despite the tension crackling through the air like heat lightning. "My job is to serve drinks, which I do with efficiency. It does not include tolerating your wandering hands or your assumption that my employment gives you ownership over any part of my person. Now, would you like another whiskey, or would you prefer to continue making a spectacle of yourself?" The silence that followed felt heavy enough to collapse the timber beams overhead. Tucker's face cycled through several shades of fury before he turned and stormed toward the door, his boots hammering against the wooden floor. "You will regret this," he threw over his shoulder. "There are not many jobs for mouthy women in this town." "Then perhaps I shall have to find employment somewhere my mouth is appreciated," Delilah called after him, earning a strangled sound from the bartender that might have been a laugh or a groan of despair. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows, and gradually the noise of the saloon resumed, though at a lower volume than before. Men muttered to each other, casting sidelong glances at Delilah as she continued her rounds as though nothing unusual had occurred. The bartender, a nervous man named Henry who jumped at his own shadow, wrung his hands in his apron and looked like he might weep. "Miss Norton," he began in a voice that trembled slightly, "Tucker owns half the businesses in this town through his connections with the timber company. If he decides to make trouble for you, there will not be much I can do to protect your position here." Delilah set the tray of glasses on the bar with a gentle clink. "I understand, Henry. You have been kind to employ me these past 6 months, and I hold no grudge if you need to let me go. But I will not apologize for defending myself against a man who thinks his money buys him the right to put his hands wherever he pleases." A deep voice rumbled from the corner of the room, rich and rough as river stones. She should not have to apologize. Every head in the saloon turned toward the speaker. The man sat alone at a corner table, half hidden in shadow, but even seated it was clear he was enormous. When he stood, unfolding himself to his full height, several men actually took a step backward. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the lamplight behind him. His hair hung past his collar, dark brown and sun-streaked, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin and rough wool, and a massive hunting knife hung from his belt alongside what looked like a smaller blade for skinning game. The man's eyes, a startling pale blue in his weathered face, fixed on Henry. "How much does she make in a week here?" Henry stammered, his Adam's apple bobbing. That is, about $3, plus meals in a room upstairs." The giant man reached into a leather pouch at his belt and placed several coins on the bar with deliberate precision. The gold caught the lamplight, gleaming. "That is $12, a month's wages. If Tucker causes trouble, you can tell him the mountain man, Zeke Pearson, does not appreciate men who threaten women for having a spine." The name sent a visible ripple through the room. Even Delilah, who had been in Willits for only half a year, had heard of Zeke Pearson. He was a legend in the mountains, a trapper and hunter who came into town perhaps 3 times a year to trade his furs and restock his supplies before vanishing back into the wilderness. Stories about him ranged from the plausible to the fantastical, but everyone agreed on certain facts. He was stronger than any 2 normal men. He could track anything that walked or crawled, and he had once killed a grizzly bear with nothing but his knife when it charged him near his cabin. Delilah found her voice, though it came out slightly softer than she intended. "That is generous of you, Mr. Pearson, but I cannot accept charity. I work for my wages." Zeke's pale eyes shifted to her, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. His expression was difficult to read behind the beard, but something in those eyes was not unkind. "It is not charity. I am looking for someone to help me with a problem, and it seems you might be exactly the person I need." "What sort of problem?" Delilah asked, suspicion creeping into her tone. She had learned long ago that men who offered help usually wanted something in return, and that something was rarely anything she was willing to give. "The talking kind," Zeke said, and there might have been the faintest trace of humor in his gravelly voice. "Walk with me. We can discuss it where there are fewer ears." Delilah glanced at Henry, who looked torn between relief at the potential solution to his Tucker problem and concern for her safety. She made her decision in a heartbeat, untying her apron and hanging it on the hook behind the bar. "If you try anything untoward, Mr. Pearson, I should warn you that I carry a derringer in my pocket and I know how to use it." "Good," Zeke said simply. "A woman should be able to protect herself." They walked out into the cool evening air of Willits, where the scent of pine and redwood mixed with the smell of wood smoke from 100 chimneys. The town sat in a valley surrounded by mountains thick with timber, and the logging industry had transformed it from a sleepy settlement into a bustling community of nearly 800 souls. The main street was wide and muddy from recent rain, lined with false-fronted buildings that promised everything from dry goods to legal services. Zeke led her away from the saloon toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scattered cabins and then to wilderness. He walked with the easy, ground-eating stride of someone who spent most of his life on his feet, and Delilah found herself hurrying to keep pace despite being a reasonably tall woman herself. "You're going to explain this problem of yours," she prompted when they had reached a split rail fence that marked the boundary of someone's property. Beyond it, the forest rose dark and deep in the fading light. Zeke stopped and turned to face her, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed over his massive chest. "I have a sister," he said without preamble. "Sarah. She's 19 years old, and she's living with me in my cabin about 15 miles northeast of here, up in the high country." Delilah waited, sensing there was more to the story. "Our parents died of fever 6 years ago," Zeke continued, his voice carefully neutral in the way of someone discussing old pain. "I was 23 then, already living in the mountains. Sarah was 13. Our uncle took her in, raised her in Sacramento, but 3 months ago he died too. Heart gave out. Sarah had nowhere else to go, so she came to find me." "That seems reasonable," Delilah said carefully. "Siblings should help each other." "The problem," Zeke said, "is that she's been living with me alone for 3 months, and people are starting to talk. Not here in Willits, where nobody knows us well, but in the smaller settlements closer to my territory. A man and a woman living alone together, even if they are brother and sister, it gives people ideas. Bad ideas." Understanding dawned, cold and unpleasant. "They think you are living in sin." "They think Sarah is my woman, not my sister," Zeke confirmed, his jaw tight with anger. "Last time I went to trade at Morrison's Post, the postmaster refused to sell to me, said he did not do business with immoral men. When Sarah came with me to buy fabric for a new dress, the shopkeeper's wife called her a whore to her face." Delilah felt a surge of sympathy. She knew what it was like to be judged by people who knew nothing of your circumstances. "That is cruel and unfair." "Sarah is shy," Zeke continued. "She does not have your fire. The accusation made her cry, and she has not wanted to leave the cabin since. But she needs to be around other people, especially other women. She needs friends, conversation, things I cannot give her. I thought if I could find a respectable woman to come stay with us, to be a companion for Sarah and help with the household work, it would silence the gossip. People could see that we have nothing to hide." "You want to hire me as a companion for your sister," Delilah said slowly. And to help with the work," Zeke added. "Cooking, mending, the things I'm not skilled at. I can pay you $5 a week plus room and board. It is isolated living, and it will not be easy, but you would be safe. I give you my word on that." $5 a week was significantly more than she made at the saloon, and the prospect of being away from men like Tucker held considerable appeal. But living in the wilderness with a man she had just met, even if his sister was there as well, seemed like tempting fate. "You do not know anything about me," she pointed out. "I could be a thief or a charlatan. I could rob you blind the first night." "You stood up to Tucker knowing it could cost you your job," Zeke said. "That tells me you have principles. And you did not simper or play coy when I offered you money. You were direct and honest. Those are qualities I value." "I could still be a terrible cook," Delilah said, though she was already half convinced. The idea of spending her days in the mountains, away from the noise and judgment of town life, appealed to something deep in her nature that she had not fully acknowledged before. "Then Sarah and I will survive on burned beans and tough venison," Zeke said, and there was definitely humor in his voice now. "The mountain air will make up for it." Delilah studied him in the deepening twilight, this giant of a man who had defended her without being asked, and who now stood offering her an escape from a life that had been growing increasingly difficult. His face was hard to read, all sharp planes and heavy beard, but his eyes were steady and clear. She had learned to trust her instincts about people, and her instincts said that Zeke Pearson, whatever else he might be, was a man of his word. "I would need to gather my things," she said, "and I should tell Henry properly that I am leaving, not just disappear." Something that might have been relief crossed Zeke's features. "We can leave in the morning. I have a wagon with supplies parked behind the general store. There is room for your belongings." "How did you know I would agree?" Delilah asked. I did not know," Zeke admitted. "But I hoped. When I saw you face down Tucker, I thought to myself, there is a woman with courage. There is a woman who could handle mountain life. And when you told him you would not apologize for defending yourself, I knew you were exactly what Sarah needs, someone to show her that women do not have to be silent or afraid." The compliment, delivered in his matter-of-fact way, warmed something in Delilah's chest. "The men in the saloon seemed shocked that I talked back to Tucker." "They were shocked," Zeke agreed. "Good. You will keep me honest always." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with a meaning that Delilah did not yet fully understand. But there was something in the way Zeke looked at her, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I should get back," she said, suddenly needing to break the intensity of the moment. "I have things to arrange." "I will be at the general store at first light," Zeke said. "If you change your mind, I will understand." But Delilah knew she would not change her mind. As she walked back toward the saloon through the darkening streets, she felt a strange sense of rightness about the decision, as though some hidden current of fate was pulling her in a new direction. She had come to Willits 6 months ago after leaving a bad situation in San Francisco, hoping to start fresh in a place where no one knew her history. Working at the saloon had been a necessity, not a choice, and she had endured the casual disrespect of men like Tucker because she needed the wages. But now, walking through the cool evening with the scent of pine in her nostrils and the memory of Zeke Pearson's steady blue eyes in her mind, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt hopeful. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the rooftops and breath misting in the air. Delilah had packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, everything she owned in the world fitting into a single piece of luggage. She had said goodbye to Henry, who had seemed relieved that she was leaving before Tucker could make good on his threats, and had left the room above the saloon that had been her home for half a year without a backward glance. Zeke was waiting by the general store as promised, standing beside a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 massive draft horses. The wagon bed was loaded with supplies covered by a canvas tarp, everything from bags of flour and coffee to coils of rope and boxes of ammunition. He was dressed much as he had been the night before, practical clothes designed for hard use, and in the morning light Delilah could see the true size of him. His forearms, visible where his sleeves were rolled back, were corded with muscle and marked with old scars. His hands were huge, calloused, and capable-looking. "You came," he said, and there was unmistakable pleasure in his voice. "I said I would," Delilah replied, handing him her carpet bag, which he lifted as easily as if it weighed nothing and placed in the wagon beside the other goods. "Sarah will be happy," Zeke said, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. His grip was warm and solid, and Delilah felt the strength in it even though he was clearly being gentle. She has been lonely, though she tries not to show it. They rolled out of Willits as the town was waking up, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops and early risers heading to work at the sawmill. A few people stared at Delilah sitting beside the mountain man on the wagon seat, and she imagined the gossip that would follow her departure, but she found she did not care. Let them talk. She was moving toward something new, something that might actually be better than what she was leaving behind. The road out of town was well maintained, packed earth that showed the passage of countless logging wagons hauling timber down from the mountains. But after about 5 miles, Zeke turned the horses onto a smaller trail that wound upward into the forest. The trees here were enormous, ancient redwoods that blocked out much of the sky and made the air smell rich and green. Ferns grew in thick carpets beneath them, and the morning sun slanted through the branches in golden shafts. "It is beautiful," Delilah said softly, almost afraid to break the cathedral silence of the forest. "This is nothing," Zeke said. "Wait until you see the high country." They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the wagon creaking and swaying over the rough trail. Birds called in the branches overhead, and once a deer bounded across the path ahead of them, white tail flashing before it disappeared into the undergrowth. Delilah found herself relaxing in a way she had not relaxed in months, her shoulders dropping from their perpetual tension, her jaw unclenching. "Tell me about Sarah," she said after they had been traveling for an hour. "What should I know about her?" Zeke considered the question, his big hands easy on the reins. "She is kind, maybe too kind. She sees the best in people even when they do not deserve it. She reads a lot, anything she can get her hands on. Our mother taught her well before she died. Sarah can quote poetry and discuss philosophy, but she has no practical skills. Our uncle kept her sheltered, treated her like a delicate flower. She cannot shoot, she cannot ride, she barely knows how to cook beyond boiling water." "And you want me to teach her these things?" Delilah guessed. "I want you to be her friend," Zeke corrected. "The skills will come if she has someone patient to learn from. But mostly, she needs to know that she is not alone, that there is another woman who understands what it is like to navigate the world when men think they can dictate your choices." Delilah glanced at him, surprised by his insight. "You seem to understand women better than most men." "I had a good mother," Zeke said simply. "She did not tolerate foolishness from my father or anyone else. She taught me that strength comes in many forms and that respecting women is not weakness, it is basic human decency." "Your father agreed with this philosophy?" "Not always," Zeke admitted, "but he learned to. Mother had a way of making her point clear." They climbed higher into the mountains as the day progressed, the trail growing steeper and narrower. The redwoods gave way to pine and fir, and the air grew noticeably cooler. Zeke stopped once to let the horses rest and drink from a clear stream that burbled over smooth stones. He pulled out a canteen and a cloth-wrapped package containing bread and cheese, offering half to Delilah. "How much farther?" she asked, accepting the food gratefully. "Another 4 hours," Zeke said. "We will be there before dark." Delilah ate her portion slowly, savoring the sharp taste of the cheese and the satisfying density of the bread. She had not realized how hungry she was. "What made you decide to become a mountain man?" she asked. "It seems like a lonely life." Zeke leaned against the wagon wheel, his eyes distant. "I like the solitude. In town, there are too many people, too many expectations. Everyone wants something from you, wants you to be a certain way. In the mountains, I can just be myself. The animals do not care if I am sociable or polite. They care if I am skilled and respectful of their territory." "But you came into town for Sarah," Delilah pointed out. "Family is different," Zeke said. "Sarah is my responsibility now, and I take that seriously. I would do anything to protect her and give her a good life, even if it means compromising my own preferences." There was such simple certainty in his words that Delilah found herself believing him completely. This was a man who kept his promises, who honored his commitments even when they were difficult. It was a quality she had rarely encountered in the men of her acquaintance. They finished their meal and continued onward, climbing ever higher. The views began to open up, offering glimpses of the valley below and the distant mountains beyond. The world felt vast and wild up here, untamed in a way that made Delilah's heart beat faster. She had grown up in cities, first Boston and then San Francisco, and she had always thought of wilderness as something vaguely threatening, a place where civilization ended and danger began. But sitting beside Zeke on the wagon, Watching the easy confidence with which he navigated the rough terrain, she began to see it differently. This was not a place of danger. This was a place of freedom. The sun was slanting toward the western peaks when the trail finally opened into a small clearing. A cabin stood in the center, built from massive logs chinked with clay and moss. It was larger than Delilah had expected, a solid structure with a stone chimney and real glass windows that would have cost a fortune to transport this far from town. A lean-to stable stood beside it, and a cleared area beyond suggested a garden plot, though it lay fallow now in the late autumn. The cabin door opened before Zeke had even pulled the wagon to a stop, and a young woman emerged. Sarah Pearson was slender and small-boned, with the same dark hair as her brother, but worn long and braided down her back. Her face was delicate, almost fragile-looking, with large brown eyes that were anxious and hopeful at the same time. She wore a simple calico dress that had been mended several times, and her feet were shod in worn boots that had clearly once belonged to someone much larger. "Zeke," she called, her voice soft and musical. "You're back. I was worried." "I told you I would be back today," Zeke said, swinging down from the wagon with athletic grace for a man his size. He reached up to help Delilah down, his hands spanning her waist easily. "And I brought someone with me. Sarah, this is Miss Delilah Norton. She's going to be staying with us for a while as your companion." Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at Delilah, taking in everything from her practical traveling dress to the determined set of her jaw. "You're truly staying here, with us?" "If you will have me," Delilah said, smiling warmly at the girl. And she was a girl, really, barely out of childhood despite her 19 years. There was something unformed about her, something that spoke of being sheltered from the harder edges of life. "Your brother tells me you could use a friend." Tears suddenly brimmed in Sarah's eyes, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. "I am sorry," she said in a choked voice. "I do not mean to be foolish. It is just that I have been so lonely, and I was so afraid that no one would want to come all the way out here, that we would always be alone, and people would always say terrible things, and I would never have anyone to talk to except Zeke. And he is wonderful, but he does not understand things like how much I miss having another woman to share thoughts with." She ran out of breath at the end of this speech, and a single tear tracked down her cheek. Delilah felt her heart contract with sympathy. She stepped forward and took Sarah's hands in her own, squeezing gently. "I understand exactly what you mean," she said, "and I am here now, so you do not have to be lonely anymore." Sarah let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then to Delilah's surprise, she threw her arms around her in an impulsive hug. Delilah stiffened for a moment, unused to such open affection, but then she relaxed and hugged the girl back. Over Sarah's shoulder, she caught Zeke's eye. He was watching them with an expression of such profound relief that she felt something shift in her chest, some barrier she had not known she was maintaining beginning to crumble. This was going to be more complicated than she had anticipated. But as Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes and laughing at herself, Delilah thought that perhaps complicated was not necessarily bad. Perhaps it was just what she needed. Zeke unloaded the wagon with efficient speed, carrying supplies into the cabin as though the heavy bags weighed nothing at all. Sarah led Delilah inside, chattering nervously about the layout and apologizing for the rough conditions. But Delilah found the cabin charming in its rustic simplicity. The main room was large and open, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table with benches in the center. Shelves lined another wall, holding dishes, cooking implements, and a surprising number of books. A ladder led up to a loft area where Delilah could see bedrolls and blankets. 2 doors opened off the main room, leading to what appeared to be small bedrooms. "Zeke built the cabin himself," Sarah said proudly. "It took him 2 years, working between his trapping and hunting. He wanted it to be solid enough to last generations." "It is impressive," Delilah said honestly. The craftsmanship was evident in every joint and beam. This was not the rough shack she had been half expecting, but a real home built with care and skill. "You can have this room," Sarah said, opening one of the doors to reveal a small but tidy space with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "I have been using it, but I can move my things to the loft. Zeke sleeps in the other room." "I cannot take your room," Delilah protested. "Please," Sarah said, her brown eyes earnest. "I want you to have it. I like sleeping in the loft anyway. It feels cozy up there." Delilah recognized that this was important to Sarah, a way of welcoming her and making her feel wanted. She nodded her acceptance, and Sarah beamed at her. Zeke appeared in the doorway, carrying Delilah's carpet bag. He had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the frame. "Settling in?" he asked. "Yes," Delilah said. "Thank you for the room." "You will earn it," Zeke said, but there was warmth in his tone. "Tomorrow I need to check my trap lines, which means I will be gone most of the day. Sarah can show you around, introduce you to the routine." "I can do that," Sarah said eagerly. "Oh, this will be so wonderful. I will finally have someone to talk to about things that matter." Zeke caught Delilah's eye and winked, a quick conspiratorial gesture that made her want to smile. Then he withdrew, leaving the two women alone. That night, Delilah experienced her first meal in the mountain cabin. To her surprise, Zeke was not a terrible cook. He made a venison stew that was hearty and flavorful, with wild onions and carrots that Sarah said came from their garden over the summer. They ate by lamplight at the big table, Sarah chattering happily about everything and nothing, while Zeke listened with obvious affection for his sister. Delilah found herself relaxing in a way she had not relaxed in years. There was something about the isolation, the sense of being removed from the judgment and pettiness of town life, that allowed her to let down her guard. She contributed to the conversation when appropriate, but mostly she observed, learning the dynamics of this small household she had just joined. When Sarah asked about her past, Delilah was honest but brief. "I grew up in Boston," she said. "My parents died when I was 16. I went to San Francisco to live with an aunt, but we did not get along. I've been on my own since I was 18, working where I could find employment." "That must have been difficult," Sarah said sympathetically. "It taught me to be independent," Delilah replied, "and to recognize that I cannot rely on anyone but myself." "You can rely on us now," Sarah said with simple certainty. "We take care of each other here." Zeke said nothing, but his eyes rested on Delilah with an expression she could not quite read. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked down at her bowl, suddenly flustered in a way that irritated her. She was not some simpering girl to be affected by a man's regard. She was a grown woman who had survived on her own wits and strength for years, but when she looked up again and found Zeke still watching her, something in her chest fluttered like a trapped bird. The days that followed established a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Zeke was often gone, checking his extensive trap lines or hunting for meat to supplement their stores. When he was home, he worked on maintaining the cabin and outbuildings, chopping wood, repairing tools, doing the 100 small tasks required to keep a mountain homestead functioning. He spoke little but always with purpose, and Delilah found herself listening for his voice, for the sound of his boots on the cabin floor. Sarah was a delight, if occasionally exhausting in her enthusiasm. She was hungry for companionship and conversation, and she attached herself to Delilah like a devoted puppy. They worked together on household tasks, with Delilah teaching her the practical skills her sheltered upbringing had not included. Delilah showed her how to bake bread that did not come out heavy as stone, how to mend clothes so the stitches were nearly invisible, how to render fat for soap and candles. But more than that, they talked. Sarah had opinions about everything from literature to politics, ideas that had been fermenting in her mind with no one to share them with. She had read widely but experienced little, and her view of the world was both naive and surprisingly insightful. Delilah found herself challenged in ways she had not expected, forced to examine her own assumptions and beliefs. "Do you think women will ever be able to vote?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they worked together on a quilt, their needles flashing in the autumn sunlight that streamed through the windows. "I do not know," Delilah said honestly. "I hope so. But men are reluctant to share power, and voting is the ultimate power in a democracy." "Zeke says women should vote," Sarah said. "He says it is ridiculous that half the population has no say in how the country is governed." Delilah glanced up, surprised. "He said that?" "He has progressive ideas about many things," Sarah said. "He just does not talk about them much, because most men think he is strange enough already, living up here alone." "Well, not alone anymore," she added with a smile. Delilah absorbed this information, filing it away with the other observations she had been collecting about Zeke Pearson. He was an interesting contradiction, a man of violence and survival skills who, nevertheless, had a surprisingly gentle soul. She had seen him spend an hour carving a wooden comb for Sarah with infinite patience, the delicate work at odds with his massive hands. She had heard him sing softly to his horses as he groomed them, old ballads in a voice that was rough but oddly melodic. And she had felt his eyes on her more than once when he thought she was not looking. It was not the predatory gaze she had learned to recognize in men like Tucker, the one that made her skin crawl. This was different, contemplative and almost wondering, as though he was trying to solve a puzzle he had not expected to encounter. 3 weeks into her stay, something happened that changed everything. Zeke had been gone since dawn, checking the trap lines in the higher elevations. Delilah and Sarah were working in the clearing, taking advantage of a warm afternoon to wash bedding and hang it to dry. They were laughing over something Sarah had said, their hands red from the cold water, when 3 men rode into the clearing. Delilah knew instantly that something was wrong. These were not friendly visitors. The men sat their horses with the casual arrogance of those who believed themselves entitled to whatever they wanted, and their eyes as they surveyed the cabin, and the 2 women were calculating and cold. "Well, well," said the leader, a lean man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. "Looks like the rumors are true. The mountain man does have women up here." Sarah had gone pale, pressing close to Delilah's side. Delilah put a protective arm around the girl's shoulders and faced the men squarely, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "State your business and then leave," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You are trespassing on private property." The scarred man laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "Private property. You hear that, boys? The little lady thinks she can tell us what to do." "I think you should leave before the owner returns," Delilah said. "Zeke Pearson does not take kindly to uninvited guests." "Zeke Pearson," one of the other men said nervously. "Maybe we should go, Cole. You know what they say about him." "They say he is one man," Cole replied, his eyes never leaving Delilah. "And we are 3. Besides, he's not here right now, is he? Just 2 women all alone. Seems a shame not to be neighborly." He dismounted, and the other 2 followed his example with obvious reluctance. Delilah's mind raced, calculating distances and options. The cabin was 20 feet away, and her derringer was inside in her room. Zeke's weapons were locked in a trunk he kept in his bedroom. There was an axe leaning against the woodpile, but it was behind the men, out of reach. "Sarah," she said quietly, "go inside and lock the door." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "Do as I say," Delilah ordered, putting steel into her tone. "Now." Sarah hesitated for one more heartbeat, then turned and ran for the cabin door. Cole made a move to intercept her, but Delilah stepped into his path, planting herself between him and the fleeing girl. "You want to get to her, you go through me," she said, and she meant every word. Cole stopped, his scarred face twisting into something ugly. "You have got some nerve, I will give you that. But you are a woman, and not a very big one at that. What exactly do you think you are going to do?" "Whatever I have to," Delilah said. Her hand slipped into her pocket, where she kept a small folding knife she used for mending. It was not much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. The cabin door slammed, and she heard the bar drop into place. Good. Sarah was safe, at least for the moment. Now she just had to keep these men occupied until Zeke returned. If he returned. The trap lines were extensive, and he might not be back until dark. "Here is what is going to happen," Cole said, taking a step closer. "You are going to be nice and friendly-like, and we are going to have a pleasant afternoon getting to know each other. And if you cooperate, nobody has to get hurt." "Here is what is actually going to happen," Delilah countered, holding her ground, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "You are going to get back on your horses and leave, and if you do not, when Zeke Pearson gets back, he is going to track you down and make you regret the day you were born." Cole's hand shot out faster than she expected, grabbing her wrist. His fingers bit into her flesh painfully, and he twisted, trying to force her to her knees. Delilah gasped, but did not cry out. Instead, she brought her other hand up, the one holding the folding knife, and slashed at his face. The blade caught him across the cheek, a shallow cut, but enough to make him roar with pain and anger. He released her wrist and backhanded her across the face, the blow hard enough to send her staggering. Stars exploded across her vision, and she tasted blood in her mouth. "You're going to regret that," Cole snarled, advancing on her, And then a voice rolled across the clearing like thunder, deep and primal and filled with rage. "Touch her again, and you are a dead man." Zeke stood at the edge of the tree line, his rifle leveled at Cole's chest. He must have left his horses in the trees and approached on foot, silent as a ghost despite his size. In that moment, he looked like something out of legend, a figure of vengeance carved from stone and fury. His pale eyes blazed with an intensity that was almost inhuman, and every line of his massive body radiated lethal intent. The three intruders froze, their faces going slack with fear. Even Cole, who had been so confident moments before, took an involuntary step backward. "Mr. Pearson," he began, his voice suddenly conciliatory. "We did not mean any harm. We were just being friendly." "Friendly," Zeke repeated, and the word dripped with contempt. "You put your hands on her. You made my sister afraid. If that is your idea of friendly, then I would hate to see what you consider hostile." "It was a misunderstanding," one of the other men stammered. "We will just go. Right now, we will leave and never come back." "You will go," Zeke agreed, his rifle never wavering. "But first you're going to apologize to Miss Norton, on your knees." Cole's face flushed red. "I'm not apologizing to some saloon girl." The crack of the rifle was deafening. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from Cole's boots, and he jumped backward with a yelp. "The next one goes through your knee," Zeke said calmly. "Then the other knee. Then we will see how brave you feel. Now get on your knees and apologize." Cole looked at the rifle, at Zeke's implacable face, and made his decision. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, his face burning with humiliation. "I apologize, Miss Norton. I was out of line." "Again," Zeke commanded, with sincerity this time. "I am sorry," Cole ground out, the words clearly costing him. "I should not have touched you or threatened you. It will not happen again." Delilah, still touching her throbbing cheek where he had struck her, said nothing. There was nothing to say. Apologies meant nothing from men like this. They were only sorry they had been caught. "Now get out of here," Zeke said. "If I ever see any of you within 10 miles of this property again, I will not bother with warnings. I will shoot on sight. Do you understand?" The three men scrambled for their horses with undignified haste, mounting up and spurring away down the trail as though pursued by demons. Zeke watched them go, his rifle still ready, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did he lower the weapon and turn to Delilah. The rage drained from his face, replaced by concern. He crossed the clearing in 3 long strides and reached out as though to touch her injured cheek, then stopped, his hand hovering uncertainly. "Are you hurt?" "I will have a bruise," Delilah said, trying to make her voice light and failing. Now that the danger had passed, she was beginning to shake with reaction. "But I have had worse." "You should not have to have had any," Zeke said fiercely. "I should have been here. I should have protected you." "You did protect me," Delilah pointed out. "You arrived in time." "Barely," Zeke said. He looked haunted, his eyes dark with something that might have been fear. "When I came through the trees and saw him hit you, I wanted to kill him. I have never wanted anything so badly in my life." The raw honesty in his words made something inside Delilah crack open. She had spent so long being strong, being independent, refusing to need anyone. But standing there with her face throbbing and her hands still shaking, she found she did not want to be strong anymore. "Not right now. I was afraid," she admitted, the words coming out small and broken. "I thought they were going to hurt Sarah. I thought they were going to hurt me, and no one would know or care." "I would know," Zeke said, and now his hand did touch her face, cupping her uninjured cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so large and dangerous. "I would care. You matter, Delilah Norton. You matter to Sarah, and you matter to me." The way he said her name, with that rough tenderness, made her heart stutter. She looked up into his face, seeing past the beard and the weathered skin to the man beneath. This man who had defended her without hesitation, who had been willing to kill to keep her safe. This man who looked at her as though she was precious. "Zeke," she whispered, not knowing what she wanted to say but needing to say his name. The cabin door flew open, and Sarah burst out, her face streaked with tears. "Is everyone all right? I heard a shot. Delilah, your face. Oh God, they hurt you." The moment shattered, and Zeke stepped back, his hand falling away. But his eyes remained on Delilah for one more heartbeat, and in them she saw everything he was not saying. Everything that had been building between them since that first night in Willits when he had defended her against Tucker. This was dangerous. This was complicated. This could end in heartbreak. But as Delilah let Sarah fuss over her, leading her into the cabin to tend to her injuries, she found she did not care about the danger. For the first time in her life, she wanted to take the risk. That night, after Sarah had finally fallen asleep in the loft, Delilah sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket, unable to settle. Her cheek ached where Cole had hit her, and every time she closed her eyes she saw his scarred face, felt his hand twisting her wrist. She knew she should try to sleep, that exhaustion would make everything worse, but her mind would not quiet. The door to Zeke's room opened, and he emerged, fully dressed despite the late hour. He stopped when he saw her sitting there. "Cannot sleep?" he asked quietly. "No," Delilah admitted. "Too much has happened today." Zeke moved to the fireplace and added another log, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. Then he sat down on the bench beside her, close but not touching. His presence was warm and solid, comforting in a way she had not expected. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her, his voice low so as not to wake Sarah. "You matter to me." Delilah pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "Why? You barely know me." "I know enough," Zeke said. "I know you are brave. I know you stood up to men who meant you harm, both in town and today. I know you have been kind to my sister when you had no obligation to be. I know that when you talk back to men who think they can intimidate you, it makes my heart beat faster." Delilah turned to look at him, surprised by the admission. In the firelight, his profile was all sharp angles and shadows, but there was nothing frightening about him. He looked tired and worried, and somehow younger than his 29 years. "When I saw him hit you," Zeke continued, still staring into the fire, "something inside me snapped. I've killed animals for food and pelts. I've fought men when I had to. But I have never felt rage like that, like a living thing inside my chest trying to claw its way out. I wanted to hurt him for touching you. I wanted to make him suffer." "But you did not," Delilah said softly. "You controlled yourself. You let them leave." "Only because I knew it would upset you if I killed them in front of you," Zeke said bluntly. "Not because they did not deserve it." Delilah should have been horrified by this admission. She should have been disturbed by the violence implicit in his words, but instead she felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously like gratitude, like affection. "No one has ever cared enough to feel that way about me before," she said, "to want to protect me that fiercely." Zeke finally turned to look at her, and his pale eyes were intense in the firelight. "Then you have known the wrong people." "Apparently so," Delilah agreed. She hesitated, then made a decision. "Zeke, I need to tell you something about my past, about why I came to Willits." "You do not owe me explanations," Zeke said. "I know, but I want you to understand." Delilah took a breath. "In San Francisco, I worked as a seamstress in a high-end shop. I was good at it, skilled enough that wealthy women requested me specifically. One of the clients was a married woman whose husband took an interest in me. He was persistent, and when I refused his advances, he told his wife that I had tried to seduce him. She had me fired and made sure I could not get work anywhere else in the city. That is why I came to Willits. I was starting over with nothing." Zeke's jaw tightened. "Men like that should be horsewhipped." "I survived," Delilah said, "but it taught me not to trust easily, not to believe men when they say things that sound too good to be true." "I am not him," Zeke said, "and I'm not making you promises I cannot keep. But I am telling you the truth. You matter to me, Delilah, more than I expected, more than is probably wise." Delilah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She did not cry. She had not cried since she was 16 years old and bearing her parents. Crying was weakness, and she could not afford weakness. But then Zeke's hand found hers beneath the blanket, his calloused fingers lacing through her own, and the tears came anyway. She cried for the girl she had been who had lost her parents too young. She cried for the years of struggle and loneliness and constant vigilance. She cried for the part of herself that had learned to expect betrayal and pain instead of kindness. and Zeke simply held her hand and let her cry, offering no platitudes or false comfort, just his silent presence. When the storm finally passed, and she sat there exhausted and wrung out, he produced a clean handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse. "For what?" "For not telling me everything will be fine," Delilah said. "For not trying to fix it or make it better. For just being here." "I will always be here," Zeke said, and it sounded like a vow. "For as long as you want me." Delilah looked at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, scarred and work-roughened, strong hands that could snap a man's neck but held hers with infinite gentleness. She thought about what it would mean to trust him, to let down the walls she had spent years building around her heart. It was terrifying. But sitting there in the firelight with his hand warm in hers, she found she wanted to be brave one more time. "What if I want you for a very long time?" she asked quietly. Zeke's fingers tightened around hers. "Then I would count myself the luckiest man in the mountains." They sat together until the fire burned low, not speaking, just existing in the quiet warmth of the cabin. And when Delilah finally stood to go to her room, Zeke rose with her and pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste and sweet and full of promise. "Sleep well," he said. "You too," Delilah replied, though she doubted either of them would. But when she lay down in her narrow bed, her hand still tingling from his touch, she fell asleep almost immediately and dreamed of mountain peaks and clear blue eyes. The weeks that followed took on a new quality, charged with possibility and unspoken feeling. Zeke and Delilah moved around each other with a new awareness, finding excuses to stand close, to brush hands, to exchange glances that lasted a moment too long. Sarah noticed, of course, and she was delighted, scheming in her innocent way to throw them together at every opportunity. "Delilah, you should go help Zeke check the smokehouse," she would say. "I can finish this mending on my own." Or, "Zeke, why do you not take Delilah to see the waterfall you told me about? It is such a beautiful day, and I have reading to catch up on." Zeke and Delilah would exchange amused glances at these transparent machinations, but they went along with them. The truth was, they wanted the time together, the chance to talk without Sarah's well-meaning but constant presence. On one such occasion, Zeke did take Delilah to see the waterfall, a half-hour's walk from the cabin through forest that smelled of pine and damp earth. The falls were not large, perhaps 20 feet high, but they were beautiful, cascading over moss-covered rocks into a pool so clear you could see every stone on the bottom. "I come here when I need to think," Zeke said, settling on a flat rock near the pool. "There is something about the sound of water that settles my mind." Delilah sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "It is peaceful," she agreed. "I can see why you love it up here. The mountains, the solitude. It is like the world cannot touch you." "The world touches us," Zeke said. "Those men proved that. But up here, I can choose how much of it to let in." They were quiet for a while, listening to the rush of water. Then Zeke said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That night by the fire, you said you wanted me for a very long time. Did you mean it?" Delilah's heart began to beat faster. "I meant it." "Because I need you to understand something," Zeke continued, his eyes on the waterfall rather than her face, as though it was easier to say difficult things without eye contact. "I am not a man who gives his heart lightly. When I care for someone, it is completely, forever. And I'm starting to care for you in a way that terrifies me." "Why does it terrify you?" Delilah asked softly. "Because you could leave," Zeke said simply. "Winter is coming, and mountain winters are harsh. You might decide this life is too hard, too isolated. You might want to go back to town, to civilization. And if you did, I would have to let you go, because keeping you here against your will would be wrong. But it would destroy me." Delilah reached out and took his hand, forcing him to look at her. "Zeke Pearson, I have lived in cities all my life, and I have never been as content as I am right now, in this moment, sitting beside this waterfall with you. I am not going anywhere." "You say that now," Zeke said, but there was hope in his voice. "I say that now, and I will say it tomorrow and the day after," Delilah insisted. "I know my own mind. I know what I want. And what I want is this: you, Sarah, This life we are building together. Zeke studied her face as though trying to memorize every detail. I am not an easy man to love, he warned. I am too blunt. I spend too much time alone. I am better with animals than people. Good thing I am not most people, Delilah said. And for what it is worth, I am not an easy woman to love either. I am stubborn. I do not take orders well. I have a temper. I noticed, Zeke said, and there was definitely humor in his voice now. That first night in the saloon, when you told Tucker off, I thought you were magnificent. Magnificent, Delilah repeated, tasting the word. No one has ever called me magnificent before. Then they were fools, Zeke said. He raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his beard soft against her skin. Delilah Norton, you are the most magnificent woman I have ever met, and I am falling in love with you. I thought you should know. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Delilah felt her throat tighten with emotion. Men had said they loved her before, but it had always been a prelude to demands, to expectations of what she should give them in return. This felt different. This felt like a gift being offered with no strings attached. I am falling in love with you too, she said, and watched his face transform, joy breaking across his features like sunrise over the mountains. I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish, that I should protect my heart. But I cannot help it. You make me feel safe. You make me feel seen. You make me want things I thought I had given up on. What things? Zeke asked. A home, Delilah said. A partner. Someone who values my opinions and does not try to silence me when I speak my mind. You said that night in town that I would keep you honest, but you keep me hopeful. And that is a much greater gift. Zeke pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into his strength, fitting against his side as though she had been made to be there. They sat like that for a long time, watching the waterfall and not speaking, content in the simple fact of each other's presence. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Zeke said, "We should head back. Sarah will worry." "Sarah is probably planning our wedding," Delilah said dryly, and Zeke laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Would that be so terrible?" he asked as they stood and began the walk back toward the cabin. "Being married to me?" Delilah considered the question seriously. "No," she said. "It would not be terrible at all. But we should probably wait more than 6 weeks before making such a permanent decision." "Probably," Zeke agreed. "Though for what it is worth, I already know I want to marry you. I knew it that first night when you told Tucker you would not apologize. I thought, there is the woman I want beside me for the rest of my life." "You decided you wanted to marry me based on one conversation?" Delilah asked, torn between amusement and disbelief. "I decided you were worth knowing better," Zeke corrected. "The wanting to marry you part has developed over the past weeks, watching you with Sarah, seeing how you have adapted to life up here, the way you hum while you work, the way you laugh at Sarah's jokes even when they are not funny, the way you look at the mountains like they are something sacred. I could list 100 reasons, but they all add up to the same thing. You belong here, with us, with me." Delilah felt tears sting her eyes again, but these were happy tears. "Ask me again in the spring," she said, "when you have seen me through a mountain winter and still think I am magnificent." "I will," Zeke promised, "and you will say yes." "Probably," Delilah admitted, and his grin was worth every risk she was taking. Winter came to the mountains with dramatic suddenness, the first snow falling in early November and blanketing the world in white silence. Delilah had never experienced anything like it, the way the snow transformed the familiar landscape into something alien and beautiful. The cabin became an island of warmth in a frozen sea, and the three of them drew closer together, bound by necessity as much as affection. Zeke had been right to warn her that mountain winters were harsh. The cold was intense, bitter enough to make her teeth ache when she stepped outside. The snow piled up in drifts higher than her head, making travel treacherous. Zeke could still check his nearest trap lines on snowshoes, but trips to town became impossible once the heavy snows began. They were isolated, cut off from the rest of the world until spring. But Delilah found she did not mind. There was something cozy about the forced intimacy of their situation, the three of them huddled around the fire in the evenings while wind howled outside. Sarah read aloud from her books, Everything from Shakespeare to dime novels, her voice dramatic and engaging. Zeke carved, his big hands producing surprisingly delicate figures of animals and birds that he would give to Sarah or Delilah with shy pleasure. And Delilah sewed, mending their clothes and making new ones from fabric Zeke had brought back from his last trip to town. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Sarah wanted to know about Boston and San Francisco, about city life and all the things she had never experienced. Delilah told her stories, editing out the darker parts but trying to give her a realistic picture. Zeke talked about his years in the mountains, the places he had been, and the things he had seen. He was a natural storyteller when he chose to be, his voice painting vivid pictures of encounters with wildlife and narrow escapes from danger. And gradually, naturally, Delilah and Zeke found moments alone together. After Sarah went to bed in the loft, they would sit by the fire and talk in low voices, sharing pieces of themselves they had never shared with anyone else. Zeke told her about the guilt he still carried over not being there when his parents died, how he had been out on a long trapping expedition and had not even known they were sick until he returned to find them buried. Delilah told him about the loneliness of her years on her own, the constant fear of being hurt or betrayed, the exhaustion of always having to be strong. They kissed for the first time during a snowstorm in mid-December. Delilah had gone out to the woodpile to bring in more logs for the fire, and Zeke had followed to help her. The snow was falling so thickly that the cabin was barely visible from the woodpile, and the world felt hushed and private, as though they were the only two people alive. Zeke took the logs from her arms and set them aside, then cupped her face in his hands, his palms warm against her cold cheeks. "I have been wanting to do this for weeks," he said, his breath misting in the frigid air. "Then do it," Delilah said, her heart racing. He kissed her softly at first, tentative, giving her room to pull away if she wanted. But she did not want to pull away. She wanted to press closer, to feel the solid strength of him against her, to taste his lips and know that this was real. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent and hungry, weeks of restrained desire finally finding release. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zeke rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "God help me, I love you so much." "I love you too," Delilah whispered back, "so much that it frightens me." "We can be frightened together," Zeke said and kissed her again. After that, they were less careful about hiding their feelings. Sarah noticed immediately, of course, and her delight was almost comical. She teased them gently but with obvious happiness, pleased to see her brother finding joy with someone who clearly adored him. "I knew it," she crowed one evening after catching them holding hands by the fire. "I knew from the moment Zeke brought you home that you were meant to be together." "You did not know any such thing," Zeke said, but he was smiling. "I absolutely did," Sarah insisted. "You could not stop looking at her, and she was trying very hard to pretend she was not looking at you. It was adorably obvious." "We were not that obvious," Delilah protested. "You were," Sarah said firmly. "But it was sweet. You were both so strong and independent, but together you are softer somehow, better, like two rough stones that have polished each other smooth." It was a surprisingly poetic observation, and Delilah felt her eyes prick with tears. "That's a lovely way to put it," she said. "It is true," Sarah said. "You have been good for each other. Zeke smiles more. You seem more at peace. I am grateful to have you both in my life." Zeke reached out and ruffled his sister's hair with obvious affection. "We are grateful to have you too, little sister, even when you are insufferably smug about your matchmaking skills." Sarah batted his hand away, laughing. "Someone had to take charge. Left to yourselves, you both would have danced around each other until spring." She was probably right, Delilah reflected. Without Sarah's gentle pushing, she and Zeke might have been too cautious, too afraid of ruining what they had. But Sarah had given them permission to take the risk, and now they had something precious and rare. Christmas came, and they celebrated simply but happily. Delilah made a special meal with dried fruit and the last of their precious sugar. Zeke surprised them both with gifts he had been secretly working on for weeks, a beautifully carved box for Sarah to keep her letters and mementos in, and a comb for Delilah made from polished horn with delicate flowers etched into the handle. "It is beautiful," Delilah said, running her fingers over the intricate carving. "You made this?" "I wanted you to have something pretty," Zeke said, looking almost embarrassed. Something that was not just practical. Delilah kissed him, not caring that Sarah was watching with a delighted grin. I love it. I will treasure it always. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Zeke and Delilah stood together by the window, looking out at the moonlight on the snow. The world outside was silent and silver, beautiful in its frozen stillness. I have something else for you, Zeke said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. I was going to wait until spring, like you said, but I cannot wait anymore. Delilah unwrapped the cloth with trembling fingers. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, made from gold with a small green stone set in the center. It was my mother's, Zeke said, the only piece of jewelry she owned. My father gave it to her when they got married. I've been carrying it with me since I left Sacramento after the funeral, not knowing what to do with it. But now I know. It belongs on your finger if you will have it. Delilah looked up at him, her vision blurred with tears. Are you asking me to marry you? Yes, Zeke said simply. I know it is not spring yet. I know we have not known each other that long by conventional standards, but I know my heart, and my heart is yours. Will you marry me, Delilah Norton? Will you be my wife and make this cabin a home and spend your life with me in these mountains? There was only one possible answer. Yes, Delilah said, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, I will marry you. Zeke slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her close, and Delilah felt a happiness so intense it was almost painful. I love you, he murmured into her hair. I will love you until the day I die. And I love you, Delilah said, my mountain man, my heart. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other while the snow fell softly outside, and Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had been searching for all her life. Not just love, but home. Not just safety, but belonging. Not just a man who would protect her, but a partner who would stand beside her through whatever came. The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Delilah wore her ring with pride, and they began making plans for a wedding in the spring. They would have to go into town to find a preacher, and they would invite the few people they knew, though the celebration would be small and simple. Sarah was beside herself with excitement, already planning what she would wear and what food they would serve. She threw herself into preparations with characteristic enthusiasm, and Delilah led her, amused and touched by her investment in their happiness. But as February arrived and the days began to grow gradually longer, something unexpected happened. Sarah fell ill. It started with a cough that she dismissed as nothing, but within days she was feverish and weak, struggling to breathe. Zeke and Delilah were frantic, trying every remedy they knew, but nothing seemed to help. Sarah grew worse instead of better, her fever spiking dangerously high, her breath coming in labored gasps. We need to get her to a doctor, Delilah said, her voice tight with fear. She needs medicine we do not have. The snow is too deep, Zeke said, but his face was anguished. I cannot get a wagon through. Even on horseback it would take days, and she is too weak to travel. Then you go, Delilah said. Ride to town and bring a doctor back. I will stay with her. Zeke looked torn, clearly hating the idea of leaving them. But Sarah's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and they both knew that without medical help, she might not survive. I can make it in a day and a half if I push hard, Zeke said. Be back in 3 days with a doctor. Can you keep her alive that long? I will do whatever it takes, Delilah promised. Just go. Please. Zeke kissed her hard, a desperate meeting of lips that tasted of fear and love. Keep her alive, for he said. Keep yourself safe. I will move heaven and earth to get back to you. Then he was gone, riding out into the snow on his strongest horse, and Delilah was alone with Sarah. She spent the next 3 days in a state of constant vigilance, sponging Sarah's fevered body with cool water, forcing her to drink broth and water even when she did not want to, sitting beside her bed and praying to a God she was not sure she believed in. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and sometimes delirious. In her lucid moments, she clutched Delilah's hand and whispered her fears. I am going to die, she said one night, her voice barely audible. I can feel it. You are not going to die, Delilah said fiercely. "I will not allow it. Zeke is bringing a doctor, and you are going to get better, and you are going to be at our wedding wearing your best dress and crying happy tears." "Promise me something," Sarah said, her brown eyes huge in her pale face. "If I do die, promise me you will take care of Zeke. He will blame himself. He always blames himself. But it would not be his fault. Promise me you will make him see that." "You are not going to die," Delilah repeated, but she felt tears streaming down her face. "You cannot die, Sarah. We love you too much." "I love you both too," Sarah whispered. "You made me so happy. These months with you have been the best of my life. Tell Zeke that. Tell him I was happy." Then she slipped back into fevered sleep, and Delilah sat there holding her hand and weeping, terrified that she was about to lose this sweet girl who had become like a sister to her. But Sarah was stronger than she looked. The fever broke on the third day, just hours before Zeke returned with a doctor in tow. When the doctor examined her, he pronounced her past the crisis, though she would need careful nursing and rest for several more weeks. "She is out of danger," the doctor said, packing up his bag. "Whatever you did, young lady, it worked. You kept her alive." Delilah sagged with relief so profound it made her dizzy. Zeke caught her before she could fall, holding her up with his strength. "You saved her," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for keeping your promise." "I could not let her die," Delilah said. "She is family." Zeke held her close, and she felt the dampness of tears on his cheeks pressed against her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, clinging to each other while Sarah slept peacefully in the next room, finally out of danger. The doctor stayed overnight and left in the morning, accepting Zeke's payment and his gratitude. Sarah's recovery was slow but steady, and by the time spring finally arrived, melting the snow and opening the trails, she was almost back to her normal self, though thinner, and still easily tired. They postponed the wedding until Sarah was strong enough to enjoy it, and when the day finally came in late April, it was everything Delilah had hoped for. They rode into Willits together, the three of them, and were married in the small church by a preacher who seemed bemused by the unusual nature of their household, but willing to perform the ceremony nonetheless. Sarah stood up as Delilah's witness, wearing the new dress they had made for her, her face glowing with happiness. A few townspeople attended, curious about the mountain man and his bride, including Henry from the saloon, who wished them well with obvious sincerity. When the preacher asked if Zeke would take Delilah as his lawfully wedded wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind. And when it was Delilah's turn, she looked into Zeke's pale blue eyes and said her own "I do" with absolute certainty. They sealed their vows with a kiss that made Sarah sigh romantically and the preacher clear his throat. Then they were married, husband and wife, bound together by law and love. The celebration afterward was modest, held in the saloon where Delilah had once worked. Henry had closed for the afternoon and provided food and drink, and the few people who had come to the wedding toasted the couple's health and happiness. Even Tucker showed up, though he stayed only long enough to offer stiff congratulations before departing, clearly uncomfortable in Zeke's presence. As the sun began to set, they climbed back into the wagon for the journey home. Sarah dozed in the back, exhausted but happy, while Zeke and Delilah sat together on the seat, her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy, Mrs. Pearson?" Zeke asked, his voice warm with contentment. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Delilah replied honestly. "You?" "I have everything I ever wanted," Zeke said. "A wife I love, a sister who is healthy, a home in the mountains. I am the most fortunate man alive." They rode home through the spring evening, the world around them coming alive with new growth and possibility. And Delilah thought about how far she had come from that day in the saloon when she had stood up to Tucker and Zeke had decided she was exactly what he needed. She had been right to take the risk. She had been right to believe in him, in them, in the possibility of happiness. And now she had a lifetime to enjoy the fruits of that courage. The years that followed were good ones. Zeke and Delilah built a life together in the mountains, working side by side to maintain their home and expand their small homestead. Delilah learned to shoot and ride and track, skills that Zeke taught her with patience and pride. She became as comfortable in the wilderness as she had once been in cities, able to read the signs of weather and wildlife, to navigate by stars and landmarks. Sarah eventually met a young man at one of the rare social gatherings they attended in town, a schoolteacher named Daniel, who was gentle and educated and utterly devoted to her. They courted properly, with Zeke playing the protective older brother role with convincing fierceness, though he admitted to Delilah in private that he liked Daniel and thought he would make Sarah happy. Sarah married when she was 21, and she and Daniel moved to a larger town 50 miles away where he had secured a position at an established school. It was hard to see her go, but Delilah and Zeke were happy for her, knowing she would have the life of intellectual stimulation and community she craved. With Sarah gone, the cabin felt emptier, but also more intimately theirs. Zeke and Delilah fell into new rhythms, their partnership deepening with each passing season. They talked about everything, argued occasionally but always fairly, and made love with a passion that never diminished despite the passage of time. 2 years after their wedding, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They were far from medical help, and childbirth was dangerous even under the best circumstances. But Delilah was healthy and strong, and when her time came in the early winter, she labored for 12 hours before delivering a squalling, healthy baby boy. They named him Jacob, and he had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. From the moment he could walk, he was exploring, getting into everything, fearless in the way of young children. Zeke was a devoted father, carrying his son on his shoulders through the forest, teaching him the names of trees and animals, showing him how to be gentle with small creatures and respectful of large ones. Delilah watched them together and felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. This was what happiness looked like. This was what she had been searching for all those years when she had thought herself alone in the world. 3 years after Jacob came a daughter, whom they named Emma. She was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with dark hair like Delilah's, and a smile that could light up a room. She adored her father, following him everywhere, and Zeke was helpless before her, giving in to her every whim with a tenderness that made Delilah laugh. They added onto the cabin, building more rooms to accommodate their growing family. Zeke's trapping and hunting provided well for them, and Delilah sold her sewing in town, beautiful pieces that wealthy women paid good money for. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were content. Sarah visited when she could, bringing her own children to play with their cousins. The cabin would fill with noise and laughter, and Delilah would watch the chaos with satisfaction, remembering the lonely woman she had been and marveling at how much her life had changed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zeke surprised her by taking her back to the waterfall where he had first told her he was falling in love with her. The children were staying with Sarah for a few days, giving them rare time alone together. They sat on the same rock where they had sat all those years ago, older now, but no less in love. If anything, the years had deepened what they felt for each other, adding layers of shared experience and weathered hardship to the foundation of attraction and affection. "Do you ever regret it?" Zeke asked, taking her hand in his. "Giving up the life you might have had in cities, the opportunities you might have found elsewhere?" Delilah did not have to think about her answer. "Never, not once. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even when the winters are hard, when money is tight, when the children are sick or the roof leaks or any of the 100 other difficulties we face? Especially then," Delilah said, "because we face them together, because I know that whatever happens you will be beside me. That is worth more than any comfort or opportunity." Zeke kissed her, soft and sweet, his lips familiar after 10 years, but still capable of making her pulse race. "I love you, Delilah Pearson, more today than the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That is impossible," Delilah said. "There's not room in one heart for more love than I already feel for you." "Then we will simply have to expand our hearts," Zeke said, and pulled her close. They sat there by the waterfall as the sun moved across the sky, talking and kissing and simply being together. And Delilah thought about the younger version of herself who had stood in that saloon in Willits and told Tucker she would not apologize for defending herself. That woman had been brave, but she had also been alone, hard-edged with self-protection and distrust. She was still brave, she thought, but now her bravery came from a place of strength rather than desperation. She could be soft because she knew Zeke would protect her when she needed it. She could be vulnerable because she trusted him with her whole heart. She could be truly herself because he loved all of her, even the prickly, difficult parts. And in return, she had given him the same gift. She had shown him that strength and gentleness were not opposites, but complementary qualities. She had taught him that he did not have to be alone, that partnership was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. She had, as he had said that first night, kept him honest, challenging him when he needed challenging and supporting him always. They had polished each other smooth, just as Sarah had said all those years ago. Two rough stones becoming something beautiful through constant contact. As they rode back to the cabin that evening, the setting sun painting the mountains gold and purple, Delilah felt a profound sense of peace. This was her life. This was her love. This was her home, and she would not trade it for anything in the world. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows as all lives do. Zeke's hair began to gray at the temples, and Delilah found silver threads in her own dark locks. Their children grew, Jacob becoming serious and thoughtful, interested in books and learning like his Aunt Sarah. Emma became wild and fearless, more at home in the forest than anywhere else, her father's daughter through and through. When Jacob was 15 and Emma 12, they added one more child to their family, a surprise late in life. They named him Thomas, and he was sweet-natured and affectionate, adored by his older siblings and doted on by his parents. Zeke joked that Thomas was their reward for surviving the difficult early years of parenthood, a child who slept through the night from the start and rarely cried. Sarah's husband Daniel died unexpectedly when he was only 43, his heart giving out just as his uncle's had. Sarah was devastated, and for a time they worried she might not recover from her grief. But she was stronger than she looked, and eventually she began to heal, finding purpose in her children and her teaching. She moved back to the mountains, buying a small house in Willits, where she could be closer to Zeke and Delilah. She taught at the local school, and her children grew up alongside Jacob and Emma and Thomas, cousins who were more like siblings. Zeke's body began to show the wear of a lifetime in the mountains, old injuries that ached in cold weather, joints that stiffened with age. But he remained strong and capable, still checking his trap lines, still hunting, still maintaining their homestead with the same dedication he always had. Delilah aged more gracefully, her face lined but still beautiful, her hair silver but still thick and long. They celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by family, their cabin and yard filled with children and grandchildren, friends from town and neighboring homesteads. It was a far cry from the quiet, isolated life they had once led, but they had learned that family and community were not burdens but blessings. That night, after everyone had left and the cabin was quiet again, Zeke and Delilah sat together by the fire, just as they had on that long-ago night after the confrontation with Cole and his men. 25 years, Delilah said wonderingly. Where did the time go? Into building a life, Zeke said, into raising children and loving each other and making a home in these mountains. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not agreed to come with you that day? Delilah asked. I try not to, Zeke admitted, because the thought of living without you is unbearable. You are the best part of me, Delilah. You always have been. And you are mine, Delilah said softly. You took a frightened, angry woman and showed her what love could be, what partnership could be. You gave me a home and a family and a life I had never dared to dream of. You were never frightened, Zeke said, cautious maybe, protective of your heart, but never frightened. That is what I loved about you from the beginning. Your courage, your refusal to be diminished or silenced. I am glad I talked back to Tucker that night, Delilah said. I am glad you were there to hear it. I am glad you shocked everyone in that saloon by refusing to apologize for being strong, Zeke said, because it meant I got to say what I thought that first night, that you would keep me honest always. And you have. You have been my conscience and my courage, my partner in all things. They sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Outside, the mountain night was alive with sounds, the call of an owl, the rustle of wind through pine trees, the distant howl of a coyote, familiar sounds, comforting in their constancy. I would do it all again, Delilah said suddenly. Every moment, every choice, every difficulty. If it meant ending up here, with you, I would do it all exactly the same. As would I, Zeke said. He stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. "Come to bed, Mrs. Pearson. We have earned our rest." They walked to their bedroom hand in hand, their steps slower than they once were, but no less sure. And as Delilah lay beside her husband in the darkness, listening to his breathing slow into sleep, she felt a contentment so deep it was almost transcendent. This was what happily ever after looked like. Not perfection, but partnership. Not ease, but effort rewarded. Not the absence of challenges, but the presence of someone to face them with. She had talked back to men, and they had been shocked. But Zeke had seen her defiance as a virtue, not a flaw. He had recognized in her the strength and spirit he wanted beside him always. And together, they had built something beautiful and lasting in these wild mountains. As Delilah drifted off to sleep, her last thought was one of profound gratitude. Gratitude for the courage to speak her mind that night in the saloon. Gratitude for Zeke's wisdom in recognizing her worth. Gratitude for every moment of the life they had created together. They lived in the mountains for the rest of their days, growing old together with grace and love. Their children thrived, carrying forward the values they had been taught: respect, courage, honesty, compassion. Their grandchildren played in the same forests where Jacob and Emma had played, learning to love the wilderness as their grandparents did. And when Zeke and Delilah finally passed, many years later and within months of each other, they were buried on the hillside overlooking their cabin, together in death as they had been in life. The stone that marked their graves was simple but perfect. Zeke Pearson and Delilah Norton Pearson, beloved partners, forever home. Their legacy lived on in the family they had created, in the land they had stewarded, in the love they had demonstrated. And somewhere in the mountain air, in the whisper of wind through pine trees and the rush of waterfall over stone, their spirits remained, bound together for eternity as they had been bound in life. Because some love stories are not just about romance. They are about finding your place in the world, about recognizing the person who sees you truly and loves you completely. They are about building something that lasts beyond a single lifetime, creating ripples that extend into the future in ways you can never fully know. Zeke and Delilah's story was one of those love stories. It began with a woman who refused to be silenced and a man who recognized that her voice was exactly what he needed. It grew through hardship and joy, through seasons and years, through the small moments and grand gestures that comprise a life well lived. And it ended, as all good stories must, with the certainty that what they had built together would endure long after they were gone. Their children would tell their grandchildren about the mountain man and the saloon girl who fell in love against all odds, about the woman who talked back and the man who loved her for it, about two people who found in each other exactly what they had been searching for all along: home, partnership, love that lasted forever. And in the end, that was more than enough. That was everything.